Plan B Parenting, Foster and Step Parent Stories, a conversation with attorney Debbie Osborne. That is your topic for today. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer as cases are fact dependent. Hi, everyone. This is attorney Mac Pierre-Louis. Welcome back to the Lawyers and Mediators International podcast. And today I am with a special guest, and that is Debbie Osborne. She's an attorney and experienced foster care parent who's going to be talking to us today about blended families, foster care system, and step parenting, and to just give a lot of really good tips and advice to people who are out there who might be a step parent, who might be dealing with other people's children and all the benefits and joys that come out from that. And so, Debbie, thank you so much for joining the show. Welcome. And how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you so much, for coming on. I appreciate you. You and I had been talking for, you might not realize it, for almost a year because I was thinking about
Yes.
having you on some time ago, but we never got it done. But now,
Schedules.
finally, yes, it's 2025, and so all is new. And just wanted to have you come and talk about your experience, your personal story, and just giving stories, anecdotes, advice, and tips to people who are out there who this might resonate with. But first, I'd like for you to kind of introduce yourself. I will preface it by saying that what I do know about you is that, like me, you're an attorney.
Okay.
You did a lot of social work at one point in time, and you've channeled all of that knowledge into what you did for the bulk of your life, and or I would say for some time, in the book you wrote on it, which was raising other kids who are not your own biological children, but
Right.
who you fell in love with and who you invested your life into serving and helping. And so, but without me continuing on, tell me about yourself and the audience.
Well, I joke I have career ADD. So I started out as a social worker, a juvenile court probation officer when I first graduated from college, and I burned out and retreated to law school, but kept my passion for working with young people. My parents had done that, so I grew up working with what back then we called at-risk youth.
Mm.
And I worked with what is now Georgia's Department of Juvenile Justice, and burned out. Decided that law school was a better alternative than becoming an alcoholic, and so I uh, enjoyed law school, did well in it, and but stayed involved working with youth organizations. And um, I was single. I married late in life, and so I spent quite a bit of time. I just signed up to be a single foster parent, and because of my background as a social worker, I knew what I was getting into. So they assigned me. I don't want to say the most challenging cases, but I was
Mm.
single. I had a busy legal uh, practice, and then I did a stint as a prosecutor of child abuse crimes against children. So, given that, the foster agency assigned me with teenagers who are the most difficult to place. They can be the most challenging, but they also are fairly independent. So, it wasn't a problem for me to work an extra hour to come home, because you can leave 15, 16, 17-year-olds at home
Mhm.
longer than you can younger kids.
Yeah.
So that was my fostering experience. And then when I came back into private practice, moved back home to Atlanta, met and married a man with 5 kids, although only 2 of them, only the younger 2, were still at home at the time. And so I have been being a stepmom to that family ever since. We are now, my husband and I are in our empty nest phase, which we're enjoying. So we have shifted to, we're working with an organization here in Georgia, Connections Homes, that assigns mentors to young people who have aged out of the foster care system without having made a connection to a family. So we're working with that end of the foster care system. So I basically like to say I've never had biological kids, but I've
Mhm.
collected 7 kids and 10 grandkids.
Yes, and I think your story would resonate with a lot of people out there who have been through something similar, or who might find themselves, raising children who were not theirs biologically,
Right.
but don't know what to call it. And so, but they have faced challenges, they face difficulties, and sometimes they need a little bit of help, a little bit of guidance. Um, I'm sharing my screen, just so people can see this is your website, debbieosburn.com, and that's where they can go uh, to learn more about you, as well as your ysoacademy.com. And we'll put all these links on the show notes as well so people can um, get in contact with you if they want. But wanted to kind of segue over to your book because all the experiences that you've gained working with children has resulted in you writing the book, Raising Other People's Children: What Foster Parenting Taught Me About Bringing Together a Blended Family. So let's start off with that. First off, that term blended family is something that you hear around quite a bit these days. Can you, just from your own experience as having been in a blended family, uh, is this something that is happening more and more and more these days where people need to take stock of this new reality that we're living in?
Oh, yes. I think the statistics are, I think at the top end, I've seen statistics that 50% of first marriages end in divorce. I think that's probably a little bit high. Um, but there's no doubt that it's even if it's less than 50%, it's a significant minority. And then second and third marriages really have a horrendous rate. They're in the 70 and 80% of second and third marriages fall apart. So um, we have all sorts of complex blended families that we're raising kids in, and those are just the relationships. I mean, that's just measuring the marriages. We're not measuring the long-term relationships that result in kids and then fall apart, and then the reconstituted relationships after that that don't result in marriage. There's a lot of different types of families that are just not being captured by the marriage and divorce statistics.
Yeah, exactly. And I deal with this quite a bit as well because I've
Oh
done a
yeah.
lot of family law cases, and that's the new reality we live in. So now, so we've discussed, why you wrote your book, but can you share some pivotal experiences from your foster parenting journey that shaped your insights in your book?
Well, I like to say that my book is the lessons that my kids taught me, the things that I wish I had known when I went into it. Because even though I had been a social worker and sort of knew what I was getting into, I'd never raised kids before. And all of the manuals for raising kids were aimed towards raising your biological kids and didn't really talk about being a plan B parent, or as I phrase it, the person who, from the kid's perspective, is not supposed to be there in their lives. And so I started seeing themes with my foster kids that I later I recognized when I became a stepmother. And the first one was kids kept saying, "You're not my mom.
Yeah.
I don't want to be here." And I, it took me a while to realize I couldn't take that personally. The story I like to tell is not long, maybe a year or so after I got married. my husband's ex-wife asked for custody of the two youngest kids. My husband had custody.
Yeah.
And since your clientele is lawyers, I'm sure they will understand when I say that no one ever before had punched my lawyer button at the same time of punching my protect my family button. And so I'm let's just say I'm a better lawyer than I am a client, Mac. And so um, but when that happened, we tried to, talk to the kids because it wasn't and the youngest son, he wasn't going to discuss it at all because he just didn't want to be seen as taking sides. And we of course weren't asking him to take sides. We just didn't want to spend a whole lot of resources doing something going down a road that he would hate. And so my husband finally phrased it this way, said, "All right, let me ask you. If you had a magic wand, what would your life look like?" And this child, who was 12 or 13 at the time, he didn't hesitate. He said, "Oh, if I had a magic wand, Dad, you and Mom would still be together."
Yeah.
And then there was this pause, and then he looked over at me very concerned, and said, "No insult, Debbie. You and the dogs would be living right next door." and and he and I had bonded. We had a great relationship. This was not an antagonistic relationship. I was filling a lot of holes in his life, and we got along really well. But if his world were perfect, I would be the nice neighbor lady next door. I would be somewhere in his life, but I would not be his parent. And I think that illustrates more than anything else that coming into these relationships, whether it's as a foster parent or as a step parent, our journey with our children starts with they have lost something. They have lost their intact biological family. And so whether they've either lost their parents have divorced or one of their parents has died. That's the only reason I'm stepmother, is because of divorce, and in other
Yeah.
cases it's because someone has died. As a foster parent, it's because the kids, for whatever good and wonderful and well-meaning reasons, they have been ripped out of their comfortable, their known family, and sent to live with a stranger who may be a very nice person but is still a stranger. And so they have all suffered a loss, and that's where we come into their history and join their story is on the heels of that loss. And I
So,
think we first have to understand that
mhm.
as parents, or as step parents and foster parents.
So no, thank you for all that, because it brings up a very important point that parents need to remember, and that is we need to see things from the perspective of the child, right? And in your
Mhm,
book, you talk about a child having gone through a trauma of losing their quote unquote intact family. Can you
mhm.
kind of reemphasize just how crucial, how important is it that we see it that way? Um, like the child had if a child had a magic wand, he would want to restore that. And so I think in your book
Yes,
you express how we can't explain it just to logic. It's
no,
endemic in us as humans that we just, as children, want to have our two biological parents stick together. And
yes.
that's profound.
It's it's a primal urge, I think, and it's one we can't reach by logic. We can't reach by saying to kids, "Yes, that's too bad, and I'm here now." Words just don't reach that urge, and so we have to give them space and
Mhm.
understand that we are their plan B parent,
Yes.
and that it's possible to build a good relationship. I have built good relationships with most of my kids, and there's ways you do it. And that's what I talk about in my book. But you have to start from understanding that whatever their former family was like. And of course, we want to think that they're much better off with us. That's why we're doing this, is because we want to care about our kids and bring healing. And obviously, if we are marrying their parent or becoming part of a relationship with their parent, of course we want to think that that certainly our partner is better off with us than with the ex. That's just a human instinct. And we can always come up with reasons. The other parent is a drug addict, or a narcissist, or an alcoholic, or just a immature person, or obnoxious, or on some level we do things better than they do, and that's fine. That's what we tell ourselves, and it's human nature. But our kids don't care about any of that, and our kids are not going to buy into that. And we in fact will damage our relationship by setting up that competition.
Yep. And
The way I phrase it is, it's not a competition, and if it is a competition, we lose. we
mhm,
we just do. Um, and so the only way we win is by not competing. But
exactly. Well,
yeah,
how do you know that you're not a clinician, you're not a
yeah,
psychologist, right? You're a lawyer by training, but a
right.
experienced foster parent. So is all this knowledge from what you've observed anecdotally over time through child after child after child, you're seeing a pattern emerge?
It's what I've learned. It's what I've learned from lots of therapy with my kids. So I am a big believer in expertise. Now, I am a lawyer. I've spent 30 years
Yeah.
cross-examining experts in depositions, so I don't uncritically believe experts. I have found many of them to be um, knowledgeable in one area and complete idiots in other areas.
Yeah.
So, but I do value expertise when I find it. So I've learned a lot about the effects of trauma on kids, for example. Um, and at the same time, so you have to understand where your kids are coming from, and give them space, and understand that they have agency. They make their decisions, and there are some decisions we can't do anything about. Um, One thing I talk about it. I don't talk about it in my book, but I did it in my ebook. It's a thought I had after I had written my book. I may put it if I ever have a second edition.
Yeah.
But that is that we're storytelling creatures, and so our kids tell themselves a story of their life, and they're always the hero in their story. And there's only two spots for us in the story. We are either the villain, because every story has a villain, or we are the mentor who helps them get around and get past the villain and get to their goal. Um, and sometimes our kids will let us be the villain. I'm sorry, let us be the mentor. And sometimes they won't. Sometimes every story has to have a villain, and that's just us. And there's nothing we can do about that. Those are rare, but they do happen.
Yeah.
We've got a couple of kids that have cast us as the villain and have gone off in their life. And all I can say is, I love you, and you know where to find us.
Yeah.
Um, but with the vast majority of our kids, we are on good relationships. So it is possible to understand where they're coming from, and give them what they need, and be a plan B parent, and have a great relationship. But you first have to understand that our journey with them starts with a loss and with trauma.
Yes. Could you delve deeper into what you mean by Plan B parenting? Because that's a title of the episode, and I was reading about it, and I've always kind of imagined the term Plan B in a certain light, because you only hear it really when it comes up to the conversation about birth control or whatever,
Right,
because people
right.
sometimes see it as a negative, like, well, I had Plan A, didn't quite work out, so here's Plan B. Here's
Okay,
what's going to happen instead. But you're
go to
turning it
plan.
on its head.
Right. I think plan B parenting is a very powerful thing. It's a second chance.
Yeah.
And very few of us have our plan A's work out. I think it was Henry David Thoreau who said that the young man gathers materials to build a temple, or possibly a palace, and at length the middle aged man decides to build a woodshed with them.
Mm.
And um, woodsheds are wonderful things. So it is it is what we need, and these are relationships. So that can be very positive and very wonderful. So even though we are not our kids' first choice as a parent, and there's nothing we can do about that. We can still have a very powerful role in their life as the Plan B parent, the mentor, if you will. If you look at all of the fairy tales, mentors are very powerful people. And in fact, in most of the old fairy tales and classic stories, they overshadow the parents.
Yeah.
I mean,
Can you give an example?
oh, Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Now it's because his parents have died, but that's fairly common. Cinderella, her uh, she has an evil stepmother. The father is kind of like not even in the story. He's
Yeah.
there, but doesn't really figure in the story. So the fairy godmother is the one who does the most of the heavy lifting of the parenting job in that story. My favorite fantasy story would be Lord of the Rings, where you have these are adults, but there's not a parent figure, but you have the Gandalf, who's the mentor for the poor hobbits who are
Yeah.
more or less the
Actually,
heroes in the story. Yeah.
no,
So the mentor it's a very powerful, and being a Plan B parent is a very positive, very powerful place to be.
no, thank you for that because I had never thought about that before in that context of the mentor. Just yesterday, I was watching on, I think it was on Amazon Prime Videos, The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbird. Is a
Right.
2023 film. I saw the Hunger Games series years ago in the early or 2000, early 2000, mid 2000s.
Right.
But last night I'm watching this one just as a late night flick, and now that you're saying this, it makes sense. Yes, it's human nature, right? That somebody else can come in to kind of be the mentor, and they can harm, they could hurt, but they can become a hero in the story. And
Right.
that's very much what you were doing as a foster mom.
Right. Right. Becoming a very important part of a child's growing up,
Yeah,
which is really what their quest is. And if we do our job right, they won't need us eventually, and they'll be independent. And we can be a very important part of getting them from childhood to adulthood.
got it. Okay. So, next question. When it comes to the audience, can you share some, well, what audience do you envision when you wrote your book? Who do you want this book to resonate with, and what do you hope that they'll take from it?
I want it to resonate with people who find themselves um, involved in a situation that is new to them and that they don't know how to manage. And um, the impetus for the book was a friend of mine who's in child welfare, who was an author who kept nagging me until I finally wrote the book. But one of the tricks that I had heard when you write the book is understand who you are writing it for. And I sat down and I realized I was coming off of a foster parenting my husband and I were doing with one of my foster kids had hit a really bad patch, and so we inherited for 5 years. We inherited a grandchild
Mhm.
and an adolescent grandchild that we ended up raising. And you're talking generational trauma, a couple of generations of trauma
Yep.
there, and it was extremely difficult. And my husband kept saying, "I've raised 5 kids, I know how to do this," and I kept saying, "But you've not raised a child with this level of trauma." And we found ourselves at loggerheads, and part of it was my fault because I understood so much of this from having gone through so much therapy with my previous kids, family therapy issues. And I had just internalized things so much that to me it was as clear as if you want milk, you drive to the store kind of answers. And I realized this was his first exposure to this level of trauma. I mean, his kids had lived through their parents' divorce, so he knew some of that, but
Mhm.
they had not they had not dealt with this level of abuse and substance abuse and those kinds of things
Yeah.
that our grandchild had to live through. So I wrote the book for him. Honestly,
Mhm.
it was the things that I wished I had sat down and told him. I convinced him of probably is better. Many of us. I I'm a very self-confident person who married a self-confident person, so just telling me things doesn't always convince me.
Yeah.
But it is the sort of things that I wished I had explained to him before we took on this
Yeah.
project.
Well, working with him as a partner, doing this project, as you call it, together, I wonder, is there a big difference between being a single parent foster mom
Oh,
versus
yeah.
a married foster mom? I'm just
Oh,
curious,
yeah.
what would you say the differences are?
I would say, well, there's two really glaring differences. One is obviously I had a second pair of hands
Yeah.
to help me with things, so I had sort of a built-in network, which was a nice advantage. But the challenge that I had not expected was having to convince the other adult in the house of how we do things and how we should do things and having to agree on it. And it we had had some of that with raising our kids. By the time this grandchild came into our life, we only had one child still at home. And actually, I think he was an adult by then.
Mhm.
He was just still in college. Um, but with the two kids, we were pretty much on the same page because their trauma had not been as deep and as complex, and um, our ways of dealing with them, his way of dealing with biological kids and my way of dealing with stepkids gelled pretty well. When we both ended up raising kids who were not our own,
Mhm.
um, and we were coming at it from such different perspectives, it was more of a challenge than I had expected to get on the same page and to agree. And part of it was my being lulled into the fact that we had done this before, so why couldn't we do this again?
Yeah.
And and the other part of it was the realization that this wonderful, reasonable, unselfish, generous man that I had married got things wrong sometimes. And he thought I got things wrong sometimes, and how could anyone dare think that I got things wrong? So, um, recognizing when I was wrong and admitting it um, was not easy. It was a good exercise for me, but it was not easy.
I bet.
So that I think was the biggest challenge, was getting on the same page
Got
um,
it.
with my
Cool.
partner,
Let's
my
talk
husband.
about blended families. So, blended families have unique challenges that they face.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, I'd like for you to kind of share what you find to be most common challenges and to get some of your recommendations. I'll bring up one thing, I guess, maybe a challenge, and you tell me what you think. It's dealing with a child who might be obstinate, who might be resistant. Um, when you're dealing with a child who's yours, I guess when I say yours, I mean
Biological,
biological,
right.
biological.
Mhm.
Um, you might, discipline a certain way. You might, deal with the resistance a certain way. But I wonder if that takes a whole nother level of patience when it involves children who are not yours biologically. I'm just curious about that. I read in your book you talk about being basically told off, quote unquote, by kids who might say something like, "You're not my mom," You never will be.
Yeah, right,
Okay. And it's like they'll take what might be naturally defiant behavior in a teenager and then conflate it or combine it with this personal attack. And
right.
how do you deal with that? I would imagine that would be a big challenge.
Oh, it is really, really hard. There's a couple of principles in one sense, being a step parent is easier than being a foster parent because being a step parent, and this was why it was so much easier for me before my husband and I were fostered, um, is because of the principle of connection before correction, or I think that there's a
Mm.
common phrase now, the nacho kids,
Okay.
which is the biological parent gets veto and decides everything. I can put give my input, um, but setting boundaries is not my job for not my kids. It's his kids and his job.
Right.
So I certainly had no problem spouting my opinion in private, but my job when the kids were around was to support my husband's decisions. It was not easy. Um, but it was much easier than being a foster parent where there was no biological parent to defer to. We both were in that same position.
Yeah.
So, the nacho kids rule didn't apply, but the making the connection, you don't have the you don't have the luxury of saying, okay, I don't have to provide structure, because as a foster parent, you do have to provide structure. You can't do connection before correction because somebody's got to do it. But you can um, make connection the priority, and you have to do both at the same time. But you lean. I talk about high nurture um, and high structure. Too many of the time, when we focus on structure, we forget about the nurture part with the kids. So I think that is one thing that is incredibly important. And I learned with my foster kids to say to them, yes, I'm not your mom. I'm sorry your mom isn't here. Um, and I, I still care about you. And they could accept or reject that, but I had to learn to make. I talk in my book about making a one-way commitment,
Mhm.
and commitment is stronger than love, because
I agree with
love
that.
is,
Yeah.
yeah, love is an emotion that, just like liking kids, can vary, and you have to be willing to make the commitment. Um, and I'm sure all of us as married people, we've had times when we thought, what the heck did I do?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm going to be able to make it through long term with this person, and but I'll make it till tomorrow, and we'll see what we're going to do. And that commitment carries you over to those rough patches until you can recapture the love and the magic in the relationship.
Mhm.
And so I think that is another thing we have to do, is make a one-way commitment with our kids. The other thing that I feel very strongly about is understanding that the trauma that they have faced, and I'm glad to see a lot of more understanding about trauma and trauma-informed
Mhm.
practices. But the downside to that is it sort of feeds into our society's current um, um, lionization of victims,
Mhm.
and that what you can add up what one of my foster kids one time told me. She said, I got plenty of victim points to get into college. I don't have to
Uh,
have good grades.
you said plenty of victim what to get into college?
Victim points.
Huh, okay.
Yeah. So we're teaching kids that the way to get ahead is to add up victim points, to be victimized. And I really reject that, because if all we do is see their trauma as an excuse and we allow them to use it as an excuse, then we just leave them mired there. So we have to look at their trauma as an explanation, as an understanding of where they are, but they still can live up to standards, and they still can get past it. One of the very experienced foster parents that I um, uh, learned from when I first started said to me, sometimes you just have to learn to say to kids, I'm very sorry you went through that, and I love you, and the dishes have to be done.
Yeah. So you give a framework from in which they must operate, and rules
Right,
are rules,
right,
but you're also showing empathy and
right,
trying to keep that connection going. So
right,
connection before correction,
right.
right? And commitment is greater than love.
Yes.
Could you go a little bit further into the commitment one? It resonates with me when you say that when you're going through difficulty in a marriage, for example,
Hmm.
you may want to give up if you feel like the love's not there. But if you remain faithful to the commitment, to the promises, the vows that you made, then it'll take you through, it'll carry you through the rough patches, and then the love can be rekindled, right?
Right. Um, yes, I think the way you described it is very accurate. Now, sometimes in our relationships with our kids, like I said, um, they cast you as a villain, and the relationship may not ever be rekindled. But the point of commitment is that you are who you are, and that you don't change that in reaction to them. And so you make the commitment, you make the one way commitment, because after all, these are kids. It's never going to be an equal relationship in the same way that it is with adults. And so you are just making a commitment to be a caretaker and to be in a role. Now, I would say there's a that you have to protect your commitment with healthy boundaries. This is another difference between commitment and love. Our kids need to know that we love them and we care about them no matter what their flaws and no matter what stupid decisions they make. But that doesn't mean that I can stay committed to being a part of their life and helping them. And so you can't enable destructive behavior. You can still love them, you can still care about them, but healthy commitments require healthy boundaries. And so when I'm talking about a one way commitment, I'm not talking about an unlimited commitment. It is one that has boundaries, and that's the only way to protect a healthy relationship is to have healthy boundaries.
Understood. Do you think, side note, that it's easier to, I guess, work with younger kids versus teenagers? Do teenagers bring their own unique, I guess, set of difficulties or challenges that foster care or step parents need to take note of and deal with appropriately?
Yeah, younger kids are less complicated, and part of it is because puberty
Yeah.
just changes everything. My favorite saying with kids whose parents are hitting puberty, I just say to them, "Look, you just hang in there. The aliens will return their brains." And so every kid has the challenges of puberty. But a lot of times, what we see with kids who suffer trauma is the trauma just kind of lies there, and we think they're doing fine. And I just story after story after story I could tell you, and
Yeah, no,
statistics
please.
I
We
think
love
bear
stories
this
here.
out. Of kids who do just fine, adopted kids who do just fine until they hit puberty, and then not only does the world cave in on them from normal puberty stuff, but it's like then the trauma bursts out of that closet where they have
Mm.
put it in the back of their mind
Yeah,
and just starts playing havoc with their lives. So it's something you need to brace yourself for and understand, and get professional help, or be prepared to deal with. So teenagers are, I don't want to say they're harder, they are more complicated.
yeah, that's a good
Younger
word.
kids are much simpler, but then puberty it's just hard on all of us, and particularly when you add social media and all of the navigating the world today. I, People say it's much more difficult today than it was. That may be true. It may just be that I'm remembering when I was a child, my life was simpler, but kids' lives are simpler
Yeah.
than teen lives or adult lives.
Yes. So, how do you advise parents to build trust and connection with stepchildren or foster children, especially to build trust and connection?
Well, I think there's a lot of different ways that you build trust and connection. The one thing you have to understand about trust is that it takes time. That there is no quick shortcut, and that's very frustrating for us. But life is not a 2-hour movie that manages to end in 2 years.
Yeah.
Um, I remember, and I think I may have put this story in my book, but our youngest son was, he was always very concerned. Every time I would travel for work, he just needed all of these reassurances that I was going to come back.
Mm.
And I remember on one trip, I think I was walking down like Fifth Avenue in New York City, and I get this call from him on my cell phone, and he wants to know what's for dinner. And I said, "Well, I don't know. Go look in the refrigerator and
Hmm.
see what's for dinner." And I understood it wasn't, he didn't want to know what was for dinner. He wanted to know, was
Yeah.
I still coming back, and was remembering him. And part of that also was, he also was convinced that eventually his dad and I were going to break up. And
Yeah.
I do talk in my book about one night when I was telling him good night, getting him tucked in for bed. He said, "Debbie, when you and Dad break up," I said, "We're not going to break up." "Okay, whatever. If you and Dad break up, can I come live with you?" And which was very flattering, but
Yeah.
it was also very sad that he was making preparations for this. And it, this has been, almost 15 years ago. And so I asked him 5 or 6 years ago, um, when he quit worrying about that, or why he had quit worrying about that. And he stopped, he thought about it, and he said, "You're still here."
Yeah.
And it wasn't anything brilliant I said. It wasn't all the reassurances I gave him. It was just the fact that I was still there. So building trust with kids is just being there. I call it being like gravity, in the sense that, gravity doesn't really care what we think about it,
Yeah.
doesn't care when we ignore it. It does what it does, and it is very impersonal and non-caring and not nurturing. So we have to add the high nurture component to it.
Hmm.
But still, the whole point of being like gravity is just, I'm still here. And so that's a big part of building the trust. And
Yeah.
then the other part of building the relationship is the way you build a relationship with anyone. You have to sacrifice for them. You have to um, you have to give them things. And again, with boundaries, you don't keep giving things to people who treat you badly. There have to be consequences for them. You have to keep self respect. I learned to say with my grandkids, I could cure them of being rude to me by saying, "Well, I don't do nice things for people who are rude to me. So,
Yeah.
we can work this out, or I'll just remind this next time you need something from me." And some of them, they'd say, and then sure enough, a week later, they would need me to take them to school or whatever, and I'd say, "No, remember, I don't do nice things for people who are rude to me." Um, so you do need some level of consequences and some level of boundaries, but you still need to be there. So, no matter how mad I am at my kids or grandkids temporarily, no matter how mad they are at me, I send them Christmas presents up until they're adults. But, when they're kids, they get birthday presents. I make sure when my kids were younger and living at home, I always made sure that they got a present for their dad and a present for their mom, no matter what the state of their relationship was. There are just certain things that you model for kids and you teach them how to do, and that is on some level of just always being there and always being available within those healthy boundaries.
Yes, and so being there is part of that consistency that they need in their lives, right?
Yes.
Because a lot
Yes.
of the trauma that they suffered through, I think a lot of it was based on the fact that everything was being shifted under their feet, and
Right.
they couldn't stand firm on anything. And so, if a child like that has trust issues, well, that's because people have let them down before, many, many, many
Right.
times, and they didn't have the
I
protection.
remember
Mhm.
I was listening to I think it was somebody speaking at a banquet.
Mhm.
I know it was an Eagle Scout talking about what Scouts had meant to him.
Yeah.
And he talked about going through his parents' divorce, and he phrased it. He said, when the two people you love most in the world cannot keep their promises to each other, what is there left for you to believe in?
Yeah.
And I just thought that was a very profound insight from an 18
From the
year
child.
old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Okay. So now, what are some pitfalls that step parents or foster parents should avoid when they're integrating themselves into a child's life?
I think the first thing that we should avoid is going too fast. And we think that okay, we can get this child to where we want them to be by charming them, by being nice to them, by being whatever. And that's why I keep saying you have to go back. You just have to be yourself, and you have to let them take it at their pace. This is not, building a relationship's not like a recipe where you add 3 parts love, 2 parts patience, bake it for 6 weeks, and then you've got a great relationship. It's organic. It's going to grow at different rates. You're going to care about them a whole lot more than they care about you, because adults care more about kids. That's just going to be part of it. And so you just have to be there, be caring, pay attention to what they need, not what they want, and let them take it at their pace. So that would be the first mistake
Mhm.
that I see people is trying to go too fast, trying to
First
get the
thing. Yeah.
kids where we want them to be.
Mhm.
Um, the, the second thing that I think I see well-meaning step parents doing is they either go to one extreme or the other. They try to have too much structure and say we're going to have these rules and this is what they are. When it's step parent, it's not our lane. We need to stay out of it. Or we try to charm the kids by letting them get away with things,
Mm.
by not enforcing the rules, and by trying to convince them that we're the good parent. Excuse me. And so we go to one extreme or the other. It's really hard to find that element of enforcing our spouse as step parents or even as foster parents to agree on the house rules, enforce the house rules in a loving, caring manner, um, that is not also trying to chase after the kids and woo them or charm them.
Got it. So let's talk about some practical parenting advice now. So you emphasize the importance of boundaries in parenting, and you've talked about it today. Could you elaborate on setting and maintaining healthy boundaries in blended families?
Yeah, the key to healthy boundaries is respect for other people. That's really what you're enforcing with boundaries, is your sense of self-respect. And so there are certain boundaries that you can say with kids of now, and again, it depends on the situation. You can set boundaries that kids need to, and this is a life skill, they need to learn how to express their disagreement in a respectful manner. Well, you're going to have to teach them that, but that doesn't mean you always shut down the conversation. I have a personal boundary of I don't let people use profanity directed at me. I developed that long before I became a parent. Actually, when I was an associate in a law firm, the
Yeah.
lawyers can remember the days when it was quite all right for partners to yell at associates and use profanity. And I just learned how to say, "Oh gosh, I'm sorry. I'll come back when you're not so upset." And so I do tend to do that with my kids too. It's not that I yell and fuss at them. I just end the conversation until they're less upset. Now, I don't always do that. Sometimes I just let them bounce off of me, and then we have the conversation when they're calm and and more able to have the conversation. I don't leave. I don't physically shut it down. I just wait it out. Again, it depends on the situation. But so enforcing the boundaries, you can do it in certain ways. So that one in particular, I can leave the conversation, or I can just wait it out and then bring it up later. So um, that that's just, what how do you expect them to show a certain level of respect to other people and to the family and to you? And then when they violate that, what are the consequences? And that is one of the practical tips that I would give and that I talk a lot about in my writing and in my speaking is logical consequences. And that is, think through, what consequences do kids face in real life, and how can you replicate that? So, for example, that's why I would say to my grandkids, I don't do nice things to people who are rude to me,
Mm.
because that's what happens in real life. Now, no one will say that to you, but they will quit being your friend and they will quit hanging around. Kids, you have to kind of lay it out for them that this is what's going to happen. Um, I'm a big fan of, um, you call it allowances, giving kids allowances, but actually, what I did was I just took a certain amount of my budget and I gave them control of it. So they get X dollars every week, every whatever, and they have to use it on their entertainment. As they get older, they have to use it on their clothes. And if they spend all their money on a great pair of shoes, then we have to go to Goodwill to get them a winter coat. And that's just because that's the way the budget works.
Yeah.
Um, but but the reason I like giving um, money is because then I can take some of it back.
Yeah.
I had one of my kids who just hated riding the bus and was always, quote, missing the bus. And I finally said, it takes my time and my energy to take you to school. So I think I'm just going to charge you $5 every time I have to take you to school. It's much cheaper than
Yeah.
a taxi, but gas isn't free. It solved that problem because he wanted the $5 more than he wanted to avoid the school
So he
bus.
wanted to keep the $5, right?
He wanted to keep the $5,
Yes. So that's
and
backed up by the science, which, we talk about loss aversion theory, that
yes,
children naturally want to not lose certain things that they've already obtained. So yeah, that's a
right,
good strategy.
right. And the nice thing about that is, I avoided lectures, I avoided fussing, um, all of those things that we think make such a big difference, but they don't. Kids they just wait it out. It's that whole wah 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 sound you get from the Charlie Brown cartoons.
Yeah.
That's what the kids are hearing. Um, and then the other thing about it is, you can take your fingerprints off of it to some degree. You can do this with older kids more so than younger kids. Like I said, you can say to them, "My advice to you is you not buy those shoes." But if they buy the shoes and they don't have money for a winter coat and they have to go to Goodwill, uh, it was their decision, and you can sympathize with them and talk about how awful it is that prices are so high and how tough it is to make your budget and not bail them out. So those are the kinds of things, I with kids who are approaching independence, my rule for them, for example, kids, we had kids live at home with us, And my rule for them was always, if you're in school, that's fine. But if you're not in school, you have to contribute to the family. Now, I don't want to get into charging money for my kids and fighting with them over money. So
Mhm.
I just handed over a utility bill and said, it's your job to. I usually start with the cable bill because
Yeah,
they care
that's a
about
big
that a
one.
lot more than I do. Um, and you know what? If they didn't, now I always had a backup. If they didn't pay the cable bill, I made sure I could still get my internet.
Yeah,
Um, but if they couldn't pay the cable bill, then the cable got cut off and my fingerprints weren't on it. And I could
yeah,
sympathize with them and say, gosh, I'm sorry. Yes, it's terrible, isn't it? Let's think through some ways to fix this. Um,
mm,
so, you know, real life has consequences. So
correct.
consistent with safety, if you have a young child who keeps forgetting their lunch, most kids, you just say, I'm sorry, I hope you remember it tomorrow. You don't take their lunch to them.
Yeah,
Hunger is a great motivator.
yeah,
With kids with trauma, if you have a child who's faced food insecurity,
mhm,
that may be a trigger for something much more serious that
mhm,
you can't do that consistent with keeping them
yeah.
safe. And so you have to come up with another, um, some other type of consequence.
So it's all about building strategies, and
Right.
you and your academy, you help teach parents these strategies?
Yes, I have a lot of courses up. I'm getting one up with my sister on logical consequences, but I have if you go under foster parenting, I've got several courses up there on foster parenting. And
Got it.
so I think if you go to all products, you'll see the categories of the different
Yeah,
topics that we're talking about there.
got it. Okay, next question. So, how can parents effectively co-parent with ex-spouses or biological parents in blended family scenarios?
Oh, yeah, that's tough. First rule is you never trash the other parent. You keep the kids out of the middle. You don't, whatever your disagreements are with the other parent. You the kids don't want to hear it. They don't need to hear it. So I have learned over the years because I have heard stories of foster parents being able to set up good relationships with biological parents. I've never been able to do it.
Hmm,
So obviously, if you can do it, that would be wonderful. But it's not something I can, from personal experience, tell you how to do. I would just have to say, um, talk to a lot of therapists about the way to strike up friendships with biological parents. Um, but the much harder job is to just have a truce of you just don't say anything negative about the biological parent. I actually have found myself with some of my kids in the role of they started trusting me enough to tell me what they really thought about their biological parent, and I would find myself explaining being an adult is difficult. It's
yeah,
not quite as simple as you think it is, and that's more complicated. And defending their biological parent to them, which is a good thing to do, as long as I'm being honest, because my job is, and this is the second thing to remember, my job is not to create a relationship with them. It's good if I can, but my job is to help them have as good a relationship as they can with their biological parent. And so I need to, again, consistent with safety, I need to let them have as good a relationship as they can. So if it's not safe for them to physically visit, um, get them on the phone, emails, text messages, whatever communications that are safe for the kids. We need to encourage that. The other thing that we need to do, and for this I use the analogy of a stage play,
okay,
and that is we need to stay out of the drama. We need to keep our spot. If you go to a theater show, you don't leave your place in the audience and jump up on the stage and try to
yeah,
become one of the characters, or
Correct.
the main character, a supporting character, or whatever else. Because what's happening on the stage is not about you. And so you keep your seat in the audience. And that is a, probably the strongest thing that I could say is keep your seat sitting in the audience. Now, when your kid comes back to you, you can debrief them and try to walk them through what happened, because the corollary to not blaming their parents is making sure that the kids keep their stuff, the stuff that they're responsible for, the stuff that they can control, keep their stuff separate from their parents' stuff. So it's never the kid's fault that the parents went on a bender last weekend.
Mm.
It's never the kid's fault that the parent hasn't called them for 2 or 3 months. So you have to find a way to explain that to the kids and help them work through it without saying your dad's a crappy person who should be calling you.
Yeah.
You just have to say, this is where I get into defending. It's complicated.
Yeah.
Parents have a lot on them, they have a demanding job, whatever the truth is or the reality is. And at the end of the day, it's not about you. It's, adults make their decisions and there's not much you can do about it. What you can control, you always end on a good note. What you can control is X, Y, and Z. Let's talk about how you can do more in X, Y, and Z. So those would be the main things is, don't trash the parent, but help the kids keep separate their stuff, and then keep your seat in the audience. And don't get involved in the drama. Don't compete. If you start competing, you will lose. So just don't even go there.
Hmm. Okay. So, what role do family rituals or traditions play in creating a cohesive blended family?
Family traditions are very important. They provide a structure and a framework, and they become a sort of the framework of the story. You know how I think I've heard screenwriters say, "Oh, there's only about 6 plots in the entire world. You just have to you just start with one of those plots, and then you add to it and decorate the tree, as it were." And that's what family rituals will do for us. It gives us a structure and a framework and touchstones. The other thing it can do is give us opportunities to work together as a family team. And this is one of the things that I like to talk about when we're building a new family. We think of it as a family. The kids may not think of it as a family, but we can present it to them as a team. We're all in this together. Everybody has a certain point, and our goal is to be able to live together in harmony. So let's figure out how we can get from here to there. And as a team, that's what we're going to try to get there all together. And rituals and those sort of things are just a very important part of, of giving touchstones for progress, creating positive memories. They carry all of the important things that you have in non-blended families, traditional families,
Can you
if
give an
you will.
example?
Um, and yeah, I think for example, we just finished the holiday season, so our kids have gotten used to my husband. To his credit, years before we ever got married, after he and his wife divorced, he started having the family get together with his kids and opening presents with them on
Mm.
Christmas Eve. And he'd have a
Okay.
Christmas Eve dinner. And then that opened up Christmas Day for them to spend with their mom, and didn't get into the competing half a day here, half a day there thing.
Yeah.
And so when I married him, we just kept that going. And it has now become sacrosanct.
Mm.
Everybody knows from year to year they just keep Christmas Eve open. And it has become a very important part for the boys to know, are we still doing Christmas Eve? Is the way they always phrase it.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving, my extended family, years ago when my sister got married and started having the competing family things, we moved our Thanksgiving get together to sometime the weekend after, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday after Thanksgiving. And that, when I got married and we added my husband's side of the family, we just, it has morphed into, we have about 30 people come to the house for soup and sandwiches.
Wow.
Um, and that has become a touchstone that people talk about. When are we getting together every year? Another thing that all of the boys, all of our kids, and the extended family keeps talking about is, I don't remember how many years ago I quit giving individual presents and started buying a group block of tickets to like a Christmas show, like Handel's
Okay.
Messiah or the Christmas Carol or something like that.
Yeah.
And when COVID hit, there were no shows for us to go to, but somewhere I got the idea of, we rented a movie theater for a Sunday
Mm,
afternoon and showed our own movie. And
cool.
um, we still do that now. That has become one of our. I'm always getting emails saying, when are we doing the Christmas movie
That's a
this
neat
year?
idea. Yeah.
Yeah, and then question number two is this the year we see Die Hard? So, so
They'll never go away. Never gets old.
no, no, it never will. So there's a lot of those kinds of rituals
Mhm.
that float around, and those kinds of things you can just make it as broad or as small as you want for your family. The key is you make sure you treat all of your kids the same, biological, foster, step kids, whatever they are. They are your kids.
Yeah.
um, as I've said to my kids a lot of times, I'm not your mother. You have a mother, but
Yeah.
you are my sons.
Yeah.
And, they're all, I've just never made any distinction
Yeah.
in that regard.
All right. Well, we have so many more questions I could be asking you, but because of time, I can't.
Yes.
So we'll wrap up. But thank you so much for the talk today, and I've learned a lot. Lots of things that I'm gonna be putting in my mind, so that when I talk to my own clients, I can give them some tips and maybe suggest going over to your site. So let me go back and share my screen again. So you have the YSO Academy,
Right.
empowering safety, protecting
Safety, right.
futures.
Protecting futures, right.
Yes,
We
and
talk about a
mhm,
number of
yeah,
different kinds of trauma.
yes. And so if parents are looking for tips and help, they can go here, and not just foster care parents, but also step parents and a blended
Right.
family. Okay.
Or
Um,
anyone working with a youth organization. That's
yes,
that focus.
yes. And you guys are, I think, based in one US state, but you can do this service anywhere, correct?
Anywhere.
Okay.
Yes.
So the
Yes.
whole country. And
Right.
of course, your book, Raising Other Children,
That's right.
is available
And
on
if you'll
Amazon.
if you'll
Mhm.
scroll down, I have a
Sure.
blog.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay. So you were just writing recently how we should respond as our kids deal with the loss of their families. Got it.
Right.
So you have ongoing tips for people to go
Yep.
and read. Awesome.
A lot of different things that I have worked through and thought about that I
Yeah,
I wish I'd put in my book, but
exactly.
maybe, like I said, maybe I'll put it in my second book.
Yeah. So it's an ongoing project for you.
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Well, it's all good information, all helpful information, and we have enough division and conflict in this world. And so, one of the you know um, point of this podcast is to not just educate on the law, but also on conflict resolution tips, so that people can resolve the conflicts in their lives, whether it's interpersonal conflict, conflict within the family, with your spouse, or now with your children, whether they are biological children, stepchildren, foster care children, and all of us need all the help we can get. Okay, so Debbie Osmond, thank you so much for this knowledge today. And if people want to get a hold of you, the best place to go to is debbieosborne.com.
Yep.
And is there anything else you want to close with that you would want people to remember from today's conversation?
I think just start with understanding that we're not the people who are supposed to be, from our kids' perspective. We're not the people who are supposed to be there. We never will be, but that's okay. we can still be very powerful Plan B parents.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. And don't go anywhere.
Thank you.